So first up, we have Biden's rule of lawless, right? So apparently there are two rules. There is the Trump supporters, and there is BLM and Antifa. And everybody knows it. So we had the siege of the Capitol, and so Joe Biden came on, and CNN, of course, did the major covering of his statement about the siege of the Capitol on January 6th. And Joe Biden talked about it. And I think this is really fascinating to hear Joe Biden, because I'm not going to say that, Joe Biden shouldn't have come forward and said anything. No, I'm not going to say that at all. I'm saying Joe Biden should be saying a lot more and should have been saying these things a long time ago. And he is primarily the reason this is happening, without question. So first up, we have Joe Biden explains what we were seeing on January 6th in his, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-minute statement to the press. And we have the first clip up, and here it is.
What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward.
So there were months of mobs rioting, burning, looting, raping, and killing all throughout primarily the summer and early fall of 2020 during the pandemic, which we're still in, of course, because now we're in 2021. So there were months of these riots, burning, pillaging, raping, killing, stealing, throughout major American cities. And Joe Biden said nothing until his pollsters got back to him after months of this happening. During the campaign, his pollsters say, hey, Joe, guess what? We polled and found out that people actually don't like this. In fact, we're losing a lot of support over the fact that this is happening because people are associating BLM and Antifa with the Democrat Party. That's what the pollsters told him. So then Joe Biden finally, late in the campaign, like last minute in the campaign, when he realized it was really bad, I think it was the last debate, he finally came out and said, oh, well, you're right. We really think that these people should not be looting and burning, and we really shouldn't have this in America. It's a really bad thing. People need to come together. And then, of course, he turned on a dime when he made that statement and blamed it all on Donald Trump. It was Donald Trump's fault that these individuals are criminals, and they're downtown in all of America's major cities, New York, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, and other areas, Washington, D.C., and they were burning and looting and pillaging, and it was Donald Trump's fault that was happening. So Joe Biden made that a point because it's an election, and naturally, he can't ever say a clean statement like, you shouldn't do that ever, right? You just shouldn't do it. Except now, Joe Biden comes out right away, and he says, this is the mob. The mob is wrong, and Donald Trump is inciting all of this, and of course, this really doesn't take into account of why all this is happening. Okay? So we can have two conversations and they can both be true at the same time. So please don't try to play gotcha with Mark and the Millennials. Oh, you don't really care about... You can have two conversations. One conversation can be true. It's wrong to break into the Capitol. It's wrong to kill. It's wrong to burn. It's wrong to pillage. It's wrong to riot. And you can also have another conversation, which is, why are these things happening? And what is it that we're not addressing so that we can make it not happen again? And so we have another clip, series of more clips of Joe Biden's speech. And this one is, Joe says that, we are the beacon and the light of democracy. And he talks about the rule of law. We have that clip, and here it is.
I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much. And we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and we'll prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law.
Yes, we must have a restoration of the rule of law, according to Joe Biden. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can talk about the rule of law for hours, right? Why do you think people come to the United States legally and illegally? Because they're trying to escape regimes where there is a lack of rule of law. And they're trying to come to a place where we do have rule of law. Yet, all through the last 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, what we have seen is the Democrat Party comport itself in such a way as to thwart the rule of law and thwart the Constitution as it relates to what is an impeachable offense and whether or not the President of the United States colluded and cheated to get into office in 2016. And of course, that's all they did was talk about that. He cheated because he colluded with Russia and he colluded with foreign powers to become the President of the United States. And so then you get to a pandemic and you get to the rioting by BLM, the rioting by Antifa, and Joe Biden doesn't really talk about it until he polls and finds out, well, it's wrong. Of course it's wrong. Don't you know it's wrong just naturally to say something about it? And then fast forward, we have a Congress where we have one party, for the most part, that is objecting to the electors that were chosen because they believe something went terribly wrong in the election. And Joe Biden has an opportunity after the rioting, comes out with a statement, and he talks about the rule of law and what he should have added to that, okay? So I'm not saying he's wrong about talking about the rule of law. He's right, we should restore it. He should have said that, of course, 9 months ago, but he didn't. Now he's finally saying it. Now that he's going to be president, he wants to restore the rule of law, which is kind of scary, right? Now that I'm in charge, I'm going to make sure everybody does what I tell them to do, because before that, I was all for the rioting to make sure I got elected. But he's talking about the rule of law. And why didn't he talk about, hey, one of the things we need to do to restore the rule of law in America is to have voter ID and in-person voting? If he said that, talk about elevating his presidency immediately with everyone in the United States, including Democrats, including independents, and including Republicans. He would have immediately and utterly elevated himself as a truly great statesman. He would have risen to the time, but he chose not to do that. And I really fear that he has no intention of ever making that happen. I can pray and hope that he does, but I don't think he wants it. Because if he really did, that's the first thing he would have said. And you know what that would have done had he said that? It would have literally dissipated that crowd in D.C. You'd have 1 million people going, you know what? I'm so not happy with the way things turned out. But this guy, this new president, whom I don't like, literally said something that is fundamental and foundational to keeping our country together. And the fact that he said it, well, I'm going to make sure we hold him to it. But the fact that he said it is huge because it means he's listening to us. That's the way our republic is supposed to work. Joe didn't do it. He still has time, but yesterday would have been the right time. And maybe when he gives his inaugural speech, that'll be the right time, right? There's another opportunity there. When he's inaugurated and he gives that great speech, we'll see. So Joe also said in his speech in reaction to the lawlessness in D.C., talked about how democracy is fragile. We're going to discuss this, but we have this clip first, and here it is.
But today's reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile, and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders of the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good.
So now, of course, if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, and by the way, millions upon millions of independents across this country, after having heard that part of his statement, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, here's a guy whose family has gotten rich after he has had a lifetime in politics. And so he's talking about, it shouldn't be a pursuit of power, shouldn't be about self-interest. That's the entire purpose of the entire Biden family. And so that's a bit laughable. And we've talked about that ad nauseum about Hunter Biden and the family and how, look, Joe Biden, to the best of my knowledge today, has at least 3 houses. He may have more. But if you know anything about Delaware, if you know anything about Bethany, Delaware, he has 1 house. My understanding is it's on the ocean or a block or 2 off of the ocean. If you know anything about Bethany in Delaware, that house is worth, a couple $1 million or more. And he has another house that was formerly owned by the DuPont family. And that house has to be worth, a fortune as well. And it looks like a pretty spectacular house. I'm not complaining about the way Joe Biden's living, right? Because at my heart, I'm a free market guy, right? I think that you should be able to work for what you have and keep it and pass it on to your family or to whomever you want. But Joe's been in office all this time, so how did he get all this wealth when he started with nothing? So his statement really is phony because we're saying goodbye to Donald Trump, who's leaving office, who made money on his own, right? And I know what you're going to say. Oh, well, he inherited money. Okay, yeah, he inherited some money, and then he made it into many billions of dollars. But then we've got this, you certainly can't knock him for making that money. And then we got Joe Biden, who is worth, who knows, because I haven't seen his tax returns, but worth millions upon millions of dollars after having been in office for 47 years. And now it's going to add 4 more years to that as president of the United States. It'll be 51 years, assuming he makes it. And has gotten phenomenally wealthy in the process, which is part and parcel of why you have 1 million people in Washington, D.C., because they think something's wrong when their standard of living has decreased and politicians' standard of living while in office increases exponentially. And the fact that if you're listening to this podcast and you don't find that there's a problem with that and you're a Democrat, and you go, oh, it's okay because he's a Democrat, there's something really wrong with you. There is. And likewise, if you're a Republican and you don't think there's something wrong with Republicans doing the same thing, there's something wrong with you. So we have a final clip of this series of good old Joe Biden given his little speech about the rule of lawless. Biden invokes the name of Abraham Lincoln. Kind of fascinating. We're going to talk about this at some length. But first, here's the clip.
I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth." Went on to say, "The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless." The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor.
So, look, anytime any president or any elected official quotes Abraham Lincoln, it gets my attention, right? Because Abraham Lincoln is certainly one of my heroes, and I hope he's one of your heroes as well. But here's the problem. The Democrat Party is the party that wants to cancel Abraham Lincoln. And the Democrat Party wants to eliminate much of the social studies curriculum in public schools so that kids can get through K to 12 and not even know anything or very little about our country's history and the exceptional nature of our country's founding, as well as our country's failings. They should teach all of that. But I have no doubt in my mind there are plenty of public school children across the country who don't have a clue or any knowledge of Abraham Lincoln other than his name. They probably have very little information. Not saying everybody, I'm not saying the majority, but an increasing number of kids. And so you might say, well, Mark, then why are you still complaining that Joe Biden invoked the name of Abraham Lincoln? Because once again, there's an opportunity here for Joe Biden to be super presidential when he talks about the rioting in D.C. and the breach of the Capitol and the break-in of the Capitol and the lawlessness, he has that opportunity to say, you know what? We have a monument of Abraham Lincoln on the Mall of Washington, D.C. And we put that monument there because we want to remind people of what Civil War did to this country. The Civil War ended slavery, an incredibly good thing that the Civil War did that, obviously. But we don't want to repeat a civil war over our differences. We want to be able to have a democracy where we can talk to one another. And the idea is to learn from our history, not to try to cancel history. If Joe Biden said that, he'd be sending a huge message to the nut jobs in the squad and the nut jobs in the progressive movement who don't think that there's anything in history that's worth learning. Part of it's because they're just incredibly super ideological, and part of it, quite frankly, is they're stupid. But if there were ever a time to study Abraham Lincoln in American history, now would be that time. Now would be that time. Believe me, podcast listeners. If you get an opportunity, pick up some history books about Abraham Lincoln's speeches and read about the context in which those speeches were given and how close we were to losing our republic. And Joe Biden, sad as it may be, he might be the guy that we're going to need, because he's the only guy that we have, he's going to be the president, to hopefully say the right things and bring the country together. I think that the time to have done that was quite some time ago with Joe Biden, but that's who we have. And I know what you're going to say. He's not my president. I understand, right? I understand that. I want the left to fail, but I don't want our country to fail, okay? Those are two different things. I want our country to succeed. But I think the left's ideology and their way forward is, without question, the wrong path for America.